Ji, Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. This is Yusuf and Azam. Azam, assalamu alaikum.
वालेकुम सलाम यूसुफ, कैसे हैं आप?
मैं ठीक हूँ, आप कैसे हैं?
अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह ठीक ठाक। जी
ठीक हो
यूसुफ,
गया
आज क्या कर रहे हैं आप?
जी, आज we are holding this program in memory of Professor Malik Hussain Mubbasshar. Professor Saab passed away around 10 days ago. It's a huge loss for the family of psychiatry in Pakistan. जिस इंस्टीट्यूट से मेरी ट्रेनिंग हुई, जिस कॉलेज में आज़म पढ़े, वो इंस्टीट्यूट मुबश्शिर साहब का बनाया हुआ था. उस कॉलेज के मुबश्शिर साहब प्रिंसिपल रह चुके हैं. He was part of the founding faculty of that college as well. And today we have the good fortune of having one of the greatest students of Professor Mubbasshar. Mubbasshir साहब के अपने मुताबिक फरीद असलम मिन्हाज साहब, he is my supervisor, my mentor, जिनके हाथों से मैं साइकाइट्रिस्ट बना. Mubbasshir साहब के मुताबिक Farid Saab has carried his work far beyond where Mubbasshir Saab took it, and I heard these words many times in which he expressed how proud he was and how happy he was to see where Professor Farid Aslam Minhas has taken Pakistani psychiatry. So without further ado, I ask sir to join us. Sir, Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Sir, कैसे हैं आप?
Well, grieving and surviving.
Sir, we can understand. Sir, we wanted ke, thank you so much for joining us. We wanted ke anyone who's listening, our new psychiatrists, younger psychiatrists, psychologists, generally people of Pakistan, कि मुबश्शिर साहब के क्या क्या एहसानात हैं साइकाइट्री पे स्पेसिफिकली और पाकिस्तान के लोगों के लिए इन जनरल, अगर उसके बारे में if you can share with us your memories of Mubbasshir साहब.
First of all, thank you very much, Azam and Yusuf, for organizing this event. And I am greatly indebted to you for doing so. Mainly because of the fact that the man that we are talking about and the man that we have lost 10 days ago is not an ordinary man that we are talking about. He came to Pakistan with all the qualifications that he wanted to get from the United Kingdom. And he could have settled down anywhere in the country, and he could have continued to practice medicine if he wanted to. But the passion that he had for psychiatry was so enormous that he came down to Rawalpindi and started to organize a department that he called as Department of Psychiatry. And the resistance that he met in terms of organizing that was absolutely horrendous, ridiculous, and unsurmountable. He was given one of the worst places in the hospital, which was close to the boundary wall and to the washing station of the cars and the laundry of the hospital, from where only you could see the boundary wall. And if you jumped the boundary wall, you were on the road. And there he started by taking a shared table and a chair and sat under a tree and started to organize the department. And single-handedly, he fought the battles in terms of organizing those battles. And I think his greatest asset was that he gave to us a platform where psychiatry was launched in the country, in Rawalpindi at that point. And then he was such a restless soul, and he had such an enormous amount of connections with the British psychiatrists that as soon as he got hold of establishing his department, which I remember one patient used to come, 5 patients used to come, but then over a period of time, patients started to accumulate, and they would come in and he would treat them. And he would not only treat them, but he would also get into the training mode also. And that was a time where the stigma of psychiatry so enormous and so big that many people never wanted to come into psychiatry. We were contesting at that point with jinn, jadoo, taweez, and faith healers, and people would have more trust in them rather than into psychiatry. So Professor Mubbasshar was the only lonely man with a vision, with a mission that he established that department. So that's the initial bringing up of the Department of Psychiatry that he had.
Sir, you shared that he could have practiced medicine. So from what I remember, he had membership of 3 colleges of medicine in the United Kingdom, and then he proceeded to psychiatry. For when medicine offered so much of a better chance, less stigma, why would he go towards psychiatry?
That's a very interesting question, Yusuf. And the answer is that he was a man who was a very traditional man. He was a man who would not refuse anybody, his elders especially. And his parents, the link between him and his parents was absolutely phenomenal. His father, who was a man of a vision, discussed with his son that, well, I want you to do medicine. And Mubbasshar Sahab, the brilliant man that he was, he went with all the preparation of medicine, went to England, and not only appeared from one college, he appeared from 3 colleges. And his vision was not to become a professor, to do MRCP, but since he had that contract with his dad, he went on to do that. And once he did that, he said to his dad, listen, I've done what you wanted me to do. Now kindly let me do what I want to do. And at that point, his dad had probably no option left because the son had outsmarted the father by saying, I've done you what you wanted to, and now let me do that. And that is why I say that he could have been easily a professor of medicine in any of the medical colleges in the country at that point. For him to park his MRCPs on a site and get on with MRC Psych as a forerunner was in itself a beginning of a great man thinking about organizing the psychiatry in where there was nobody around at that time. And he was the first psychiatrist in the civilian sector to have come into the country, and he had the passion and the vision to start that department.
As a professor, practicing psychiatry is one thing, but हमने सिर्फ कहानियां सुनी है, स्टोरीज सुनी है कि उन्होंने सिर्फ साइकियाट्री प्रैक्टिस नहीं की, बल्कि उन्होंने एक नेक्स्ट जनरेशन ऑफ साइकियाट्रिस्ट तैयार भी जिनमें से एक आप हैं। तो सर उसके बारे में हमें बताएंगे हाउ ही वाज सो पैशनेट कि जो काम मैं कर रहा हूँ वो आगे ट्रांसफर हो सेल्फलेसली।
Yeah, I think another hat that he had was the salesmanship of psychiatry. And he would come to the medical college. He was a smart man, dressed immaculately in the suits from Harrods of London, with a bow tie that he adored on very special occasions. He had a fluent command on English. He had fluent command on Urdu and Punjabi. The knowledge was bubbling out from him in every corner, every sentence that he had. And I think teachers are the best salesmen of their subject, and Professor Mubbasshar was the best salesman of psychiatry. He came into the class, a class that used to be around 300 students, and then 300 students would be sitting, and psychiatry was never a popular subject at all. But then Mubbasshar Sahab had that magnetic sense and that penetrative sense and that collaborative understanding of the psyche of the boys and girls at that point, that he would come and explain to the people, to the students, what psychiatry is all about. And one of the very first things that he talked about, and I've spoken about this several times before, was the fact that a lady with a somatization disorder was seen by the surgeons, and the surgeons had opened her up 3 times, finding something was wrong in her GI symptoms, and they could not find anything in the GI symptoms. And repeated investigations and 3 surgeries, this lady was referred to Mubbasshar Saab, and he made the diagnosis of somatization disorder and depression, and he started to treat that. And as luck would have it, this lady got better and better, and then that was his example for the students who would come to him, and he'll talk about it. And then when he would go to the class, because depression is one of the more common disorders in psychiatry, but then psychiatry has a whole range of other problems. And he was absolutely conversant with all the topics in psychiatry, and he would lure the young generation with the work that he had done, the way he had done, and the way he was proposing the things to move on. And I think that's where we got attracted to his salesmanship. And within a span of, you see, there was a time before Central Government Hospital was just a hospital where there was not attached to medical colleges at all. So Mubbasshar Sahib, 72, when he came in, he was working in central government, established the department, had few house officers with him. But when around 76, 77, the Rawalpindi General Hospital became part of Rawalpindi Medical College complex, then he had links with the students. And I think that's where his salesmanship got a bigger audience. And he was a man who loved audience. And he loved the audience, and he understood what the audience wanted. He spoke what they wanted, and most of the time, he understood what the audience was thinking about. So that man with that vision and with that power goes on to talk to the students, and he started to sell. And I think I was in batch number 3 of Rawalpindi Medical College. And by the time our class came for the house job interviews, I think a sensation broke open in the office of the principal when my colleague Shakil Jahangir Malik, who had merit number 9, went into the big room of the professors, and they said, "What do you want to become?" He said, "I want to become a psychiatrist." Everybody was stunned. Merit number 9 wants to become a psychiatrist. What was this all about? Then a little way down, I went in. I was in merit number 9 or 10. I think I was about 10, around 15 or 17, somewhere that merit. And when I said psychiatry, now then the professors understood that the revolution was in the making. And then another person came in, and believe me, by the time 25 people went in for interview, the seats for psychiatry were full. And that's where Mubbasshar Saab made the mark that he was getting top merit boys into psychiatry, and that's where psychiatry started to sell. And I just want to quote one example. We had a function in a medical college some time back. We had a function in the medical college long time back, around 77, 78. And there comes a man in a black tuxedo and dressed immaculately. Speeches were happening. And I went to him and I said, "Sir, can I take a picture with you?" And in those days, these mobiles were not there, and we had to call the photographer and so on and so forth. So Ghazanfar, our all-time great photographer in Rawalpindi Medical College, we requested him. We used to request him for many other photographs, but this was a very different photograph. So we got him there, and there is a picture that I took with him in the tuxedo, as I said, and one more doctor student standing with me, and that was the beginning of my admiration for this man that came into the first picture of mine with him. And few years later, when I went to United Kingdom for my further training, I took out that picture and I wrote on that picture, which he quoted many times. I said, "To master yourself, give yourself to the master." So that's a quotation that I had heard, and I felt I just wanted to share that with him. And that was the time when I was doing my master's in England that I sent him that. And when I got my result, I said, if you give yourself to the master, this is what happens. Because by then, I had cleared the membership examination of the college. I had done a diploma in psychiatry, and I had done the master's in psychiatry, which included a lot of research to do. So I think my journey with him was absolutely right from the beginning, based on respect for the subject, respect for the knowledge that he had, respect for the communication that he had, respect for the dealing that he had with all of us.
Sir, there's one thing that we often hear about Mubbasshar Saab is that he was very, very capable of picking out the best potential in people, and that's probably how he was able to identify the psychiatrist in you. If you could tell us something about how he was able to do that, to have that eye, to be able to see that this person he has it in him.
Okay, now that's a very interesting question, Yusuf. The point is that he knew the subject, and when he was speaking, he used to pick up the responses, non-verbal responses on the people that he was looking at. And that is where he made up his mind that non-verbally, who is listening, who is attentive, and who is keen. And don't get me wrong here, that if 20 people he picked out who were interested according to the students, but he would make a very quick mental state examination, which would include your past, present, and potential future. And there were many people that he would not select. He would say, no, you are very good to be a surgeon, you're very good to be a physician, don't come into psychiatry, this doesn't offer anything. So I think he selected the breed for psychiatry, and he tested that breed. And he tested with various methods that he had up his sleeves. He would give you difficult tasks, difficult questions, and difficult scenarios to prove to him that you actually are the man that he is looking for. And he would test you in difficult waters, give you very awkward situations, treat you very, very, very strictly, not give you any breathing space, and then he would realize that this is the man that I'm looking for. And if you had crossed all the passing lines with him, he would select you, otherwise he wouldn't. Now, having said that, I think in the course of time, many colleagues who were interested in psychiatry would attend his classes, but not many would become psychiatrists. And the subject had an appeal for so many people in the medical college when he was teaching, but very few would be selected to come in and join him. Many people, competent people, who went on to become qualified surgeons and physicians and gynecologists and public health specialists who came with us, worked with us for some time, but then left. Only because of the fact that they were not delivering what Professor Mubbasshar wanted them to deliver, therefore they went away. And many a times, even the best of the best who came to work with him couldn't hold on to the tight rigors that he used to have. You had to be in the class 10 minutes in the ward round, 10 minutes before the ward round would start. Your progress notes had to be completed. The senior registrars needed to have their formulation written down. My colleagues used to, and we used to write about 20 formulations before the board round. And the board round was not once a week, it was every day. And every new admission had to be clocked the same night. And next morning, 8 o'clock, you had to present the new admissions with full history and full formulation. And presenting formulations to him was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. Uh, I have very candid memories of presenting my history to him, my formulation to him. And when I would start, I mean, I'm just sharing it with you and the audience here. Trembling was a very normal phenomenon, but getting cyanosis was a regular phenomenon because of the fact that you open up your mouth and there you get blasted. Not for any wrong reasons, but the sentences that he wanted to hear, if they were not there, and if you were not onto his level, then many times you would not be able to speak more than 2 lines of your formulation that you had written the whole night before. Next morning, he would say, give me the file, give me the formulation, and then he will correct and tell you where we went wrong. So I think that was the stringent criteria of his histories. And one of the things was that again, a very interesting phenomenon, that when we were doing work with him, he would ask only that person who hadn't done the job. Now, very often we thought that he had spies in there who go and tell him that XYZ person hasn't done his history, and he'll say, "Oh, you tell me your history of that patient." Now, surprise, surprise, that history wasn't the one that was completed, but Professor Mubbasshar knew that somehow it was not completed. Now, I don't believe in that paranoia that he had informants who would tell him, but I think it was sheer intelligence that he could pick out from our expressions how comfortable and how confident that he looked, that he will pick out that man.
So some of us at trainees had that paranoia about you as well, that you had informants around the world.
Well, you see, it's very interesting. I was very blessed that he was very kind to me, and I had learned a lot from him. As I allude to the fact that in a Pakistani setup, you normally don't get many teachers around. But when you go to an English setup, you can't stay with one consultant for more than 6 months. So I stayed there for about 5 years, which meant that I had seen 10 consultants in England with whom I had direct work. And I can tell you the impact that Mubbasshar Saab had on me is much higher than the impact of those 10 people in England that I worked for. And I was very lucky that Mubbasshar Saab and I, if you do our personality profiles, we are very different from each other. But the fact that I learned from him the tricks of the trade, which over a period of time we gathered how he manipulates things and how he delivers things and how he detects those things. So because I had lived under tremendous degree of pressure with him, I had some of the transformation of his techniques into me. But my personality, as I alluded to, the fact is very different than his. I had my own style of doing that. So if you had paranoia about me, that meant, Yusuf, that I had learned the tricks right. And believe me, there wasn't a kind of a man that he had implanted amongst us to tell him, and there wasn't a man that I had it implanted to tell me that who has not done the job, but it is just the on-job training that I had.
Sir, we've heard about. Azam, please go ahead.
आपने हमने अभी तक जो भी बात की, we only talked about how good a psychiatrist and how good a psychiatrist professor he was. So he has a career, a part of his career when he left Rawalpindi Medical College and joined University of Health Sciences. And also, how what changes did he make to the medical syllabus? We hear a lot about behavioral sciences being incorporated into the medical syllabus. So, how and why is this important?
Okay. When he went to the medical college, by then he had established the department at its best. The department at that time was gathering trainees from all the 4 provinces in the country. And by the time he left, there were representation from 4+1 provinces in the country. The department had become the WHO Collaborating Center for Mental Health Research and Training. And the research and training that you see in psychiatry was initiated under the leadership of Professor Mubbasshar in the Institute of Health. And we were regularly taking up the public health aspect of psychiatry at that point. In terms of the disaster management, in terms of the primary care setup, he had launched successfully 2 important programs, which we call as community health program, a community mental health program, and school mental health program, which meant he used to say that it is too sad to leave psychiatry only for the psychiatrists alone. And he knew it very well that if the psychiatry doesn't go into the primary care setting, teaching hospitals, which he used to call as white elephants, will do nothing for psychiatry. So he was a man who initiated the community mental health program, which meant that he went over to the Rawalpindi district, Gujar Khan, Kalar Saida, Jhelum and Va on this side, and Atak, and so on and so forth, a whole primary care centers where he went out to train the primary care physician in the early detection and treatment of psychiatric disorders. And then he would go supervise, do the training, and then after the training was done, he would embark upon them that they would be linked up with the Institute of Psychiatry. Any referrals from there would come here. And then I spoke about the stigma of psychiatry. He initiated the school mental health program where he would go to in the morning assembly to the schools and address the students and the teachers. And dissociative disorder, we know, is very common. Epilepsy, we know, is very common. He would talk about those things to the students and to the teachers. And again, the referral system was established from the schools to the Institute of Psychiatry. Now, I think that was the beginning of the public health impression of the Institute of Psychiatry. And I think when he broke the shackles of the Institute of Psychiatry and extended that service out into the community, that's where psychiatry began to get recognized. And the stigma of psychiatry that was so phenomenal in the beginning started to reduce. And I could see that our numbers from 15, 20 patients a day began to rise up to about 120 a day. And there was no space in those. And nobody was willing to give him a building. Remember, he started from a tree. Then he began to have rich people who were not well. He got hold of them and he started to get the donations, and he made a very enlarged building into the Institute of Psychiatry. So, by then he had set down the foundations. Azam, you asked me about his going to the principalship. By then he was so contented that his mission was accomplished The job was being done. The teaching at undergraduate level had taken up. Postgraduate trainees were coming in. The patients were treated in different lines. Many other specialities were coming into the institute at that point. Research publications were coming up. And that's where he took up the offer of going to the medical college. Now, it's a very interesting phenomenon that when he was appointed as the principal of Rawalpindi Medical College, he took me to 3 places. He took me to his office and he removed his nameplate and put my nameplate. He took me to the Ministry of Health and said, "This man is now my replacement, and he is going to become the director of the WHO Collaborating Center and the Community Mental Health Program." And thirdly, the first letter that, or the orders that he issued after becoming the principal said, "In my place, Fareed Minhas would become the head of the institute." So I think he covered his ground and he abdicated his seat only when he was very sure that he had trained his successor to deliver and to carry on the mission that he had so wonderfully fought and delivered at that point. So I became, after his appointment as the principal of Rawalpindi Medical College, I became the head of the Institute of Psychiatry. That's a different story. I'll come back to that in a moment. But Azam, to take up your question, what changes in medical education you wanted to bring? Now, I think his reason to go into medical education section was that he could bring up psychiatry into that level and he could have bigger leverage on what he can do for psychiatry. And that's where I think he began to start working on behavioral sciences, making psychiatry as a compulsory subject, involving the physicians in the problem-based learning, involving scenarios which meant psychiatry has to come in. And for the first time, we were sitting into the final year MBBS examination on a station for behavioral sciences, on a station for psychiatry, that it began to evolve. And then I think he had a bigger landscape as a principal of Rawalpindi Medical College, but then he was picked up to become the vice chancellor of the University of the Health Sciences, the first university that came in, because before that, we were at the mercy of Punjab University as one of the departments of Punjab University. And the University of Health Sciences, which Professor Mubbasshar founded, was the first medical university of this country. And when he sat on that chair, I think he made sure that he called all the principals of the medical colleges and made them talk about behavioral sciences. That's where behavioral sciences became an integral part of your examination system in MBBS. In my time, before this thing was happening, there were 50 lectures of psychiatry which nobody attended. There was no examination in psychiatry that anybody attended. Whatever people interest had in psychiatry was because of the salesmanship of Professor Mubbasshar. But once the behavioral sciences was established and organized, people couldn't run away from that. So we used to have the examination of behavioral sciences in third year, in fourth year, but the students would come for rotation from third year onwards. And we would get 50 lectures of behavioral sciences in the first 2 years. So I think that was the beginning of a successful implementation of behavioral sciences that Professor Mubbasshar wanted to accomplish. And he did that wonderfully well. Now, when he became the Vice Chancellor, I was one of the members of the syndicate of the university. And from being a very young professor, I used to attend the meeting as a member of the syndicate because Professor Mubbasshar asked me to do that with the senior most professors. And my God, what a pleasant and sad sight it was at the same time. I began to brush my shoulders with the elite of professors of medical universities. And the way Mubbasshar Saab fought, convinced, and bulldozed them all to get behavioral sciences as a part of the examination is a classic example of advocacy, determination, motivation, and moving people in a way with the principle that follow me, lead me, and if you don't follow me and if you don't lead me, get out of my way. And that's how I saw him doing behavioral sciences recognition, bulldozing many professors of medicine, professors of surgery who were very competent in their own right, but because they had no knowledge about psychiatry, they were not convinced that psychiatry and behavioral sciences should become that. And for me, that was an on-job learning that Professor Mubbasshar, how he dealt with them. And within a flash of a time, the syndicate voted that behavioral sciences would become the as an essential teaching component. So I think that's his teaching that brought him into making behavioral sciences as an important subject.
So the way you described that Professor Mubbasshar, when he was starting off at the central government hospital, he had to start his department literally under a tree. But as far as he went, it looks like from the first day, when he's setting up his table under that tree, his vision is set at making psychiatry, establishing it in the country, ground up across the different levels. And he's not thinking if char mareez bhi mere paas aa jaye to badi baat hai. He's thinking all the way, okay, I'm going to take this as far as people like us could not even have conceived in his position, but he seemed to have a very clear vision as to where he was going.
Absolutely. I think he had a dream about psychiatry, and he fulfilled that dream. And he was the architect of thinking very early and delivering over a period of time. Any objective in his life you see, they had his eyes were very clear. He made no bones about it. And Sarpur Road or Murray Road wasn't his territory to flourish. His territory to flourish was the whole of the country and connected with the world. That was the vision that he had. That was the man that he was. That for him, Murray Road was not attractive at all. Satpur Road wasn't attractive at all for him. He had very higher aims in his life, and I think that's what he did.
Sir, you mentioned the community mental health program. There is an article in the Lancet by Professor Goldberg in which he talks about it, and he says that Professor Mubbashar's contributions are the envy of the industrialized world. That this is something that there is so much that the West has to learn from. What was that program? How was it so successful that it led Professor Goldberg to say that?
Well, you see, Professor Goldberg is another phenomenal man. And I had the pleasure of working with him for over 1.5 years. And I still work with him on different projects. And he was the main man of psychiatry in British psychiatry at that point. And he was a man who had spent a lot of time in America talking about primary care setup. And this was a niche of the WHO collaborating center that Mubbasshar Saab went to meet him in Geneva and in Cairo. And then his Indian counterpart, N.N. Vig, was another phenomenal man at that point in time in India. That these two men got together, these three men got together, and they devised this plan Indians were slightly ahead of us. And as soon as Professor Mubbasshar got into that, he left the Indians' plans way behind, and he developed the Pakistani community psychiatry much ahead of what N.N. Vig Saab had done at that point. And when Goldberg came to Pakistan, he saw what Mubbasshar Saab had offered in terms of the community program and the school mental health program. And he became a co author in some of the evaluation work that was being done here. He wrote that phenomenal article in Lancet at that point, where he said that what Mubbasshar Saab had done is the envy of the industrialized country, whereby he meant that the integration of psychiatry into the primary healthcare that the UHS in England and in America they had been trying to set up were not able to do so. So that was the envy that Professor David Goldberg at that point had. And Mubbasshar Saab had that trick. He know what to say, when to say, and how much to say. And he used his English colleagues. David Goldberg is an example. Francis Creed is an example. Other colleagues, psychologists, English colleagues, Richard Gator is an example. An endless list of British psychiatrists that Mubbasshar Saab would invite. He would hold the meetings with the Ministry of Health, and David Goldberg would be told or would be advised by Mubbasshar Saab to tell specific words to the concerned authority so that हमारे जो बड़े लोग हैं वो गोरों की बात आसानी से समझते हैं, हमारी जुबान थोड़ी मुश्किलों से समझते हैं. But Professor Mubbasshar knew that what David Goldberg can do for him, it will take him twice as much time. So he would use David Goldberg in that loop and get his job done. And I think these two men are geniuses in their own right. And when I used to see them at work, I used to imagine 10 years ahead of what I would do when I was there. So learning them, role modeling these people was a big experience for me. So Goldberg is an ardent admirer of Mubbasshar Saab. And I think both of them had worked together for a very long period of time, and they had phenomenally delivered programs that nobody had done before. And one such program that David Goldberg and Mubbasshar Saab delivered was the psychiatrists from overseas, where people from Pakistan were sent to United Kingdom for training, and they were given diplomas, and the plan was that they will come back and serve the country. Many of them came, many of them are still there, but they've been serving from United Kingdom the Pakistani problems, and they are doing a wonderful job. But I was one of those who decided to come back and fall into the footsteps that Professor Mubbasshar had trained me for. And I was so pleased. There were some problems, there were discrepancies, digressions, and attractions for me that I could stay in England, I could go to the United States of America, I could make a different kind of living. But then Mubbasshar Saab used to say one very interesting fikra, कि फरीद साहब जंगल में मोर नाचा किसने देखा. फरीद साहब Pakistan jungle nahi hai. Farid Saab, this is the place to come back. And since his and my visions coincided for different reasons, I thought his Jungle Mein More Nacha was very appealing. And therefore, I made that journey. I don't regret. Some members of my family may not be very happy with this decision because I blocked their passion and their visions and their aspirations. But then, yes, we are all selfish in different ways in our lives. I was selfish, and I came and I did whatever I was able to do. I have no regrets. People around me may have some regrets about it, but I think God has been very kind that I was able to deliver the vision and the responsibility that Mubbasshar Saab handed over to me.
जो एक चीज जो मेरे लिए बहुत pleasant है, for the past 45 minutes you have been speaking very highly of your teacher and your mentor. and you are speaking of him with a lot of respect. And कि आपने उनसे किस तरह सीखा और सब कुछ. And sir, you also talked about the salesmanship of psychiatry, which Dr. Mubbasshar had in him. Sir, हम थोड़ी सी बात हम कुछ ऐसी डेवलपमेंट्स और कुछ ऐसी काम जो कि स्पेसिफिकली आपने किए और जिनका यूसुफ और मैं एटलीस्ट हम लोग खुद विटनेस हैं, सर हम उनके बारे में भी आपसे कुछ बात करना चाहेंगे. सर देयर आर एटलीस्ट टू थिंग्स. Sir, first of all, the way you transformed the FCPS training when you became the dean of CPSP. Sir, without any, मैं आपको जिसे हम कहते हैं मक्खन लगाने के, you were the first and I would say the last dean of CPSP कि जिनको PGs जानते थे और जिनका PGs से इंटरेक्शन था. सर उससे पहले और उसके बाद भी वी वर एट लॉस्ट कि क्या करना है, कहाँ जाना है, किस तरह करना है, कैसे पढ़ना है, एग्जाम क्या है, क्या नहीं है. और सर सेकेंडली द वे यू एंड ऑल्सो मुबशिर साहब इन टाइम फॉट फॉर द मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस. सर हम ये चाहेंगे कि एटलीस्ट इन दो चीज़ों में, क्योंकि आई सी अ प्रोग्रेस कि जो कुछ मुबशिर साहब ने अंडर ग्रेड एजुकेशन में किया और UHS में किया, सिमिलर अचीवमेंट्स आपने CPSP की जो FCPS ट्रेनिंग है उसमें अचीव की. तो सर उनके बारे में.
बच्चे बात ये है कि आज हम याद कर रहे हैं मुबश्शिर साहब को, और अगर मैं आज अपनी तारीफ खुद करूँगा तो मुबश्शिर साहब मेरे से कभी खुश नहीं होंगे, और मैंने ज़िंदगी में कोई ऐसा काम नहीं किया जिससे वो नाराज़ हुए हों, सिवाय एक काम के वो मैं आपको बताऊँगा. अपने बारे में मैं अगर बोलूँगा तो मैं यूसुफ से और आपसे एक अपॉर्चुनिटी छीन लूँगा कि जब आप मेरे मरने के बाद कोई इस तरह की मीटिंग करेंगे तो आप मेरे बारे में बोलेंगे, मैं अपने बारे में नहीं बोलूँगा. I don't want to talk about myself when I'm remembering my teacher. So please excuse my total block that I have about what I have done in life. Now, the question that you've asked is a very important question, and that relates to Mubbasshar Sahib. Mental health ordinance is another very important contribution of his. That Mental Health Act of 2001 was passed through him in 2001. Now, when I went into psychiatry way back in 1981, 82, I used to drive Mubbasshar Sahib to the Ministry of Health, और कराची से हारून साहब आते थे, पेशावर से शफीक साहब आते थे, बलोचिस्तान से मालिक साहब आते थे, और हैदराबाद से काजी साहब आते थे. And I was a common driver driving these 4 people to the Ministry of Health in Islamabad. The one point agenda कि ये हम सारे कहते थे कि ये सारे बड़े बड़े प्रोफेसर्स आए हैं उधर से और हम चाहते हैं कि आप मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस करें, और हमारे 1912 का ल्यूनेसी एक्ट जो है वो वाइप आउट हो जाना चाहिए. ब्यूरोक्रेट्स हैं, ब्यूरोक्रेट्स इनकी बातें सुनते थे, इनको चाय का कप पिलाते थे. इतने पेनिट्रेटिव होने के बावजूद भी 1980 से जब से मैं इस सारी गेम में आया हूँ ये काम नहीं हो सकता. Now, the things that I'm going to share with you are very personal and very private, and not many people outside the Institute of Psychiatry know about them. So, आप दोनों से मैं दिल की बात कर सकता हूँ, जो ऑडियंस है वो भी सुन सकती है इस बात को. 2000 में we were organizing an international psychiatric conference. I was the chairman of the organizing committee. Mubbasshar Sahib had given me that task, because I had organized one conference for him in 1982, and then in 2001 he asked me. उस वक्त मैं एक उनका assistant होता था, but 2001 में I was the chairman of the organizing committee, and the rule was that every morning for the last 6 months before the conference, there was a morning meeting about the conference arrangements. एंड सुबह सुबह जब मैं 8 बजे मैं घर से निकल रहा था, 7 बजे बच्चों को छोड़ता था इस्लामाबाद के स्कूलों में, और 8 बजने से 5 मिनट पहले मैं अपने इंस्टीट्यूट में दाखिल हो जाता था, क्योंकि अगर मैं दाखिल नहीं होता था तो मुबश्शिर साहब इस तरह करके अपनी घड़ी देखते थे, फिर आपके चेहरे की तरफ देखते थे और फिर और काम करने शुरू होते थे। नाउ those were lethal moments of our life when we would enter after 8 and Mubbasshar Sahab would look at his watch and look at you and say most of the time nothing. इतना पसीना और इतनी शर्म आती थी कि मैं आपको बयान नहीं कर सकता. So anyway, I went into the room and there was a bell and I knew that this bell is for me. मैं गया उनके पास तो मुझे कहते हैं कि देखो, मैंने रात को सोचा है कि एक काम हो सकता है और वो काम हो सकता है अगर तुम मेहनत करो. सो आई वाज स्टन्ड कि मैं अपनी तरफ से बड़ी मेहनत कर रहा हूँ, अब और कौन सी मेहनत मेरे से इन्होंने करानी है. सो मुझे कहते हैं कि देखो, हम मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस पास करा सकते हैं एंड आई नो यू आर द राइट पर्सन टू डू दैट. मैं कहा सर, मैं मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस मेरी क्या हैसियत. Now he knew that I was connected to very important, influential people in the government setup at that point for my own professional reasons. Mubbasshar sir knew about that. So I won't take the names of those people, but he said, go to him and he will talk to this person and this person will talk to the president and the job would be done. So Fareed Saab had an agenda. Fareed Saab sat in the car, went to meet this man. Exactly the roadmap that Mubbasshar Saab had conceived, I delivered that roadmap. And mental health ordinance General Musharraf ने पास किया 2001 की कॉन्फ्रेंस के अंदर, रावलपिंडी की इंटरनेशनल साइकियाट्रिक कॉन्फ्रेंस में. उस कॉन्फ्रेंस के अंदर 40 से ज़्यादा फॉरेन डेलीगेट्स थे और उस कॉन्फ्रेंस की अचीवमेंट मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस का पास करना था. और जिस दिन मेंटल हेल्थ ऑर्डिनेंस पास हो गया तो हमारे साथी लोगों ने अपने अपने क्रेडिट लेने के लिए कहा कि मैंने फलाना काम किया, मैंने फलाना काम किया, मैंने फलाना काम किया. मुझे स्टेज के पीछे ले गए मुबश्शिर साहब, कहते हैं तुमने डुगडुगी बजा दी है, तुमने काम कर दिया, अब ये ना सोचो कि दुनिया क्या कहेगी. I know you and I have done it. Let the world say whatever they want to say. We have delivered the mental health ordinance for the country and repealed the 1912 Mental Health Lunacy Act at that point. So I think that was his vision, that he found the right man, guided me like a laser cut ideas that go and meet this person and do that person. And then once I made that breakthrough, he came in and he put salt and pepper on it, and the rest of the teams within working overnight with the Minister of Health and with the bureaucratic setup, the President Musharraf passed the Mental Health Act at that point. Now, I think that was a phenomenal achievement by Mubbasshar Saab to have gotten that done. And the sad story that I want to tell you. For me, as the chairman of the organizing committee, that conference was the ultimate conference, and I had made up my mind that I will never become the chairman of the organizing committee of any international conference, though for my tenure of 15 years, I could have organized 2 international conferences from the Institute of Psychiatry, but I did not. Why? Because that was a team. That Mubbasshar Sahab was the in charge. There was no personal glory for me to become the organizer of a conference. जो हमने collectively पाकिस्तान की history में international psychiatric conference कराई, I thought I had done my role and my job. And as a respect for my teacher, I said I'll never do any other conference. I never did that. So that's the mental health ordinance that Mubbasshar Sahab passed. I can't hear you, Azam.
Thank you so much for sharing that inspiration. So there was a little internet issue. Thank you so much for sharing so much inspiration with us that Mubbasshar Sahab embodied in his person and his entire life. सर जाते जाते वो जो आपने बोला था कि एक चीज जिससे वो नाराज हो गए थे वो आप बताएंगे.
Okay. By the time I was leaving, he said, "Who is going to be your successor?" I told him a name, and he said, "Why don't you consider another name?" He gave me. I said, "Sir, for my understanding, for my knowledge, for my thinking, what I am doing is the right thing that I want to do." And he wasn't very happy about the decision that I had made. He had advised me for somebody else. I did not follow his advice. And I think within 3 years, I have come to realize that my teacher was right. I regret that I didn't follow his instincts. And the lesson is very clear that if I had followed him all his life and I had done something, he wasn't very happy with me about this. And so true he was that the events that took place after I retired are so irritating, so troublesome, and so annoying that the department that Mubbasshar Sahab had organized, the department that I had cherished, and that I call my Mecca, my battlefield, my soul, I decided that I will never go back to that department ever again till my life. So that's the sadness and that's the bitterness in me that I did not follow his advice and I learned the lesson of my life not having followed my teacher.
So much. We have so much more to learn from you about Mubbasshar Sahab, about your life, about psychiatry. But unfortunately, we do have fondest or fascinating memories of Mubbasshar Sahab, if you can share with us, and then we conclude.
I think remember that this man came in like a movement. He lived like a movement, and he delivered like a lion, and he had his ways. And we haven't had time to talk about his family life, but I think there are so many things that which were impossible to do. He made them possible, and I think he left behind a lovely family, a family of psychiatrists, boys and girls. If I start talking about his family life, it will take me another hour or so to describe that. The depth, the magnitude, and the intensity that he had for his family is absolutely phenomenal. You can't imagine that. So I think his sentence that I very often use in my lectures, whenever I get the opportunity to speak, I would fail if I don't repeat that sentence. And I learned from him, and he said, "Eyes do not see what mind does not know." It was so true that when you know, your mind knows about whom you want to be in psychiatry, you find those those people very easily. And when your mind knows what to do about psychiatry, nothing stops you. And that's the name of the game Mubbasshar Sahab was.
So thank you so much. We're able to live in the footsteps
Yusuf,
of Mubbasshar.
before you guys go, Yusuf, तुम बड़े नेक आदमी हो और दीन के साथ तुम्हारा बड़ा ताल्लुक है. मेरी रिक्वेस्ट है कि मुबश्शिर साहब के लिए दुआ करा दो और अल्लाह उनके दर्जात बुलंद करे और हमें उनके नक्शे कदम पे चलने की तौफीक दे और उनकी फैमिली को अल्लाह मियाँ इस मुश्किल वक्त में इकट्ठा रखे और उनको ये हौसला मिले कि उनके वालिद और उनके मियाँ ने जो काम किया है वो कोई आम आदमी नहीं कर सकता और अल्लाह मियाँ उनके दर्जात मुबश्शिर साहब के बुलंद करे और फैमिली को सुकून दे. दुआ करा.
सलाम अला रसूलिल्लाह व अला आलिहि व अस्हाबिहि अजमईन। या अल्लाह या रहमान, या अल्लाह हम तेरे सामने दुआ गो हैं कि मुबश्शिर साहब उनके हाल पे रहम फरमा। या अल्लाह उनके दरजा बुलंद फरमा। या अल्लाह चलने की, उनके काम की हम सबको तौफीक अता फरमा। या अल्लाह जो उनके फैमिली पे इस वक्त मुश्किल घड़ी है, या अल्लाह उनको सब्र के साथ उसमें से गुज़रने की तौफीक अता फरमा। अल्लाहुम्मा अग़फ़िरहुम वरहमहुम, अल्लाहुम्मा अग़फ़िरहु वरहमहु, अल्लाहुम्मा अग़फ़िरहु वरहमहु। अल्लाहुम्मा सल्लि व सल्लिम अला नबिय्यिना मुहम्मद व अला आलिहि व अस्हाबिहि अजमईन। आमीन या रब्बल आलमीन।